The Exile Within: How Your Inner Child Sabotages Your Adult Life. Most people operate under a profound illusion. They believe that childhood is merely a phase of life that, once chronologically overcome, is neatly left behind. A collection of distant memories, old photographs, resolved or conveniently ignored, traumas, and behaviors that the discipline of maturity should effortlessly erase. However, Carl Gustav Jung, the architect of analytical psychology, revealed a radical truth that fundamentally contradicts this common notion. Within the deep psychological structure of every adult, a child still lives. And this is not a symbolic memory or a fleeting emotional vestige of the past. It is a real, potent psychic entity, a living, dynamic archetype that continues to operate silently in the adult mind. It infiltrates your thoughts, relentlessly sabotages your most important decisions, profoundly distorts your intimate relationships, and relentlessly shapes your entire identity. This inner figure, which Jung called the archetypal child, is not passive. It is not patiently asleep, waiting to be forgotten. On the contrary, it functions as a powerful, often unconscious, energetic engine that carries both the purest, most sacred qualities of being, such as creativity, spontaneity, sensitivity, and the fundamental capacity for wonder, as well as the oldest and deepest emotional wounds: abandonment, debilitating rejection, humiliation, and invalidation. Jung observed consistently in his clinical practice that the vast majority of adult suffering originates from the systematic repression of this inner child. Instead of looking at it, caring for it, or integrating it into the whole self, we learn to aggressively hide it. We erect elaborate masks of false maturity. We hide behind rigid social roles. We use endless rationalizations, and we resort to compulsive vices to keep it locked away in the shadows. And for this profound act of self-betrayal, we pay an extraordinarily high psychic price: chronic neuroses, paralyzing existential crises, relentless anxiety, toxic emotional codependency, a persistent feeling of internal emptiness, and an endless, painful repetition of destructive life patterns. The problem is that this psychic child does not simply vanish just because it has been ignored. On the contrary, the more it is denied, the more violently it manifests from the shadows, often in disguised, disorganized, and overwhelmingly chaotic ways. Adult individuals who react with disproportionate fury to minor, trivial criticisms, who feel perpetually invisible in relationships, who constantly and desperately seek validation from any authority figure, or who are incapable of establishing clear, firm boundaries. They are often not being immature in the pejorative sense of the term. They are simply being silently governed by the wounded child, the smallest self that has never been truly seen, legitimately heard, or deeply understood. And here lies the most delicate and powerful core of Jung's thought. This child does not need to be healed as if it were a defect or a broken object. It needs to be radically recognized. It demands a legitimate, sacred space within the adult psyche. For Jung, true, lasting psychological growth does not happen by denying the inner child. It is achieved only by developing what he called the internal paternal ego, the potent, intentional ability to care for one's own self from within, to establish a healing, continuous dialogue between the wounded part and the protective part. This is the true revolutionary beginning of emotional maturity, not repressing the pain, but listening to it, not pretending to be strong, but consciously building deep internal solidity. This video is an uncompromising invitation to revisit this long-forgotten, vital part of your psyche. A deep dive into the idea that your inner child is not an obstacle to your adult life, but the most crucial key to unlocking your authenticity, your deepest creativity, and your profound emotional freedom. Understanding this complex dynamic is not just an intellectual or therapeutic exercise. It is a fundamental act of psychic survival in a modern world that aggressively demands disconnection from our own truth. And perhaps by finally looking into the eyes of the child we once were and still are, we can understand why we are so chronically tired, so profoundly lost, and so endlessly needy. The answer was never, ever out there. It has always been within. And it was small, intensely sensitive, and aggressively invisible. Until now, the architect of the self, the archetype revealed. For Carl Jung, archetypes are not abstract intellectual ideas or poetic, fragile metaphors. They are living psychic structures that inhabit the vast expanse of the collective unconscious. They shape our behaviors, our most primal perceptions, and our core emotions with an energetic force that transcends all logic or conscious reason. Among these powerful archetypes, few are as instantly impactful and universally resonant as the figure of the inner child. What Jung identified was not a fleeting, nostalgic memory of childhood events, but an active, powerful psychological entity. A central core of emotional energy that remains powerfully operative within the individual, completely regardless of their chronological age. This inner child is not trapped in the past. It manifests in the present. It reveals itself in your disproportionate reactions, your most intense desires, your most irrational primal fears, and in the fundamental way you choose to relate to the world and other people. It is common for people to immediately think of memories or painful episodes from childhood when we discuss this concept. But Jung proposed something infinitely deeper. The child is the fundamental symbol of the self in formation, representing both the very beginning of the individuation journey and the vast, unknown potential for transformation that is yet to fully emerge. It is simultaneously vulnerable and sacred. Within it lies the very essence of spontaneity, sensitivity, curiosity, and creative drive. But it also holds the deepest, most unprocessed wounds, raw feelings of helplessness, shame, and abandonment. This powerful inner presence subtly yet devastatingly influences all adult behavior. When aggressively ignored, the inner child manifests through attitudes that seem pathologically disproportionate. Sudden emotional outbursts, intense, irrational insecurities, a crippling fear of abandonment, a constant, exhausting need for approval, and a paralyzing difficulty in dealing with any form of criticism or frustration. Many adults live their entire lives unknowingly guided by this wounded core. This remains true even if they hold high-level leadership positions, have established families, or meticulously maintain a public image of unshakable success. The inner child does not respect external status. It just wants to be heard, seen, and validated. The archetype of the child carries a fundamental, powerful ambiguity. It can be both the bridge to our ultimate healing and the catastrophic source of our greatest emotional imbalances. When it is finally integrated, we reconnect with raw creativity, profound intuition, and emotional lightness. When it is violently repressed, we unconsciously sabotage everything we attempt to build. For this critical reason, Jung saw this figure as one of the most vital elements of the unconscious. He declared that ignoring the inner child is akin to amputating a part of the soul, and that any attempt at genuine personal or spiritual development that does not include this profound reconnection is inherently doomed to failure. However, not all inner children manifest identically. Jung observed that this archetype adopts multiple forms within the psyche, each with distinct needs, unique strengths, and specific distortions. Some take control silently, moving the pieces from behind the scenes. Others scream desperately for all available attention, but all fundamentally influence the quality of our life. To truly understand the comprehensive impact this hidden force has on your life, we must identify its multiple faces. And that is exactly what we will explore next. The three primary manifestations of the inner child identified by Jung, and how each of them may be silently shaping your deepest, most automatic patterns. The three faces of the psychic core. Carl Jung did not limit his work to identifying the inner child as a single uniform phenomenon. In his extensive clinical studies, he recognized that this singular archetype adopts multiple distinct expressions within the adult psyche, each with specific urgent needs, unique strengths, and damaging distortions. These expressions are not rigid, separate categories, but interpenetrating patterns that together form the invisible foundation of our most automatic, habitual behaviors. Understanding these three crucial faces is essential for recognizing where the most automatic and painfully disproportionate reactions we experience in adulthood truly originate. The wounded child, the scarred core. This face carries the explicit and implicit traumas, the abandonment, the crushing rejection, the profound emotional neglect, the physical or symbolic violence, and the chronic invalidation of natural feelings. This is the child that learned, often in the earliest stages of life, that expressing needs was dangerous, that asking for attention was humiliating, and that trusting others inevitably led to pain. When left unintegrated and unacknowledged, the wounded child manifests in the adult psyche as crippling fear of intimacy, chronic high-level anxiety, codependent relationship patterns, emotional hypervigilance, a persistent aching emptiness that no external achievement can ever successfully fill. It is this specific child that makes us react to every minor criticism as if it were a devastating existential attack. It makes us perceive rejection where none exists, and it ensures we aggressively repeat cycles of self-abandonment. The eternal child, puer aeternus. While the wounded child is perpetually stuck in the past, the eternal child lives solely in the urgency of escape. This is the part of us that fundamentally refuses to grow up, to take on the weight of adult responsibility, and to endure the natural frustration inherent in long-term commitment. It relentlessly seeks constant novelty, immediate pleasure, effortless admiration, and possesses a visceral, paralyzing fear of limits or long-term commitments. In the adult, this child manifests as chronic, pervasive procrastination, unstable, superficial relationships, a pathological aversion to routine or consistency, the feeling that being an adult is a permanent, suffocating prison. Jung did not view this face as a moral flaw, but as a clear sign that the vital, kinetic energy of childhood had not yet found a mature, constructive place to express itself in the real world. 3. The divine child, the sacred potential. This third face represents the deepest creative, spiritual, and intuitive potential of the human being. It is the part of us that still absolutely believes in the mystery and inherent magic of existence, the part that feels life as a sacred phenomenon bursting with infinite possibilities. It is the absolute source of our deepest insight, our genuine compassion, and our primal capacity for wonder. But ironically, this sacred child is often aggressively suffocated by the pain and demands of the other two. Without a dedicated space to safely emerge, it withdraws and becomes utterly inaccessible, leaving the adult profoundly disconnected from their own wellspring of creativity and sense of purpose. Jung adamantly believed that most people predominantly live under the destructive dominion of the wounded child, reacting to the world from a chronic state of emotional lack and primal survival. We seek in our romantic partners the ideal parents we tragically never had. We react to professional criticism as if it were devastating personal rejections. And we create life patterns that unconsciously and faithfully repeat the stories of our childhood pain. This complex dynamic is not a sign of personal weakness. It is the direct, inevitable manifestation of a powerful archetype operating completely without conscious awareness. Recognizing these three faces is not an intellectual exercise. It is the key to deep, foundational self-knowledge. When we can accurately name which of these children is currently running the emotional show, we take the decisive first step toward regaining control of our own psychic life. But to do this, we must first understand how, from the earliest age, we were rigidly taught to hide this essential inner child behind a series of impenetrable social roles and masks, a mechanism that seems to protect us but actually makes us profoundly, chronically ill. The masks of maturity, repression, and the empty self. From the earliest moments of life, we are trained that certain emotions are violently unwelcome. We learn that feeling too much is a catastrophic sign of weakness, that crying is a shameful display, that depending on others is a mark of inferiority, and that being overly sensitive is a crippling flaw. As the years accelerate, this emotional education, marked by constant repression and symbolic punishment, trains us to wear masks. Masks of strength, masks of ruthless control, masks of fierce independence, masks of rigid, unfeeling maturity. We meticulously construct a socially acceptable self, a persona designed to please, to be aggressively functional, and to avoid all forms of rejection. But this self is frequently an empty shell, built on the systematic, conscious denial of the vibrant child that still lives within us. Carl Jung observed that this brutal suppression of the inner child, performed under the deceptive guise of maturity, is one of the single greatest central causes of modern psychological suffering. Repression does not eliminate pain. It only violently displaces it. What the conscious mind desperately tries to ignore, the unconscious meticulously stores and transforms. Repressed, stifled anger converts into crippling anxiety. Ignored, vital need becomes destructive compulsion. Stifled vulnerability emerges in the form of emotional addiction, self-sabotage, and psychosomatic illnesses. Instead of authentically healing our wounds, we become world-class experts at masking and hiding them. These masks assume various forms within the adult. The mask of the responsible adult, the one who constantly takes care of everyone else, but never ever themselves. This figure is often driven by an inner child who learned that they only deserve love when they are useful or indispensable. The mask of the strong and invulnerable, the one who needs absolutely no one, who never cries, and who solves everything in solitary isolation. This figure is propelled by an inner child who was violently forced to grow up too quickly. The mask of the successful performer, the one who relentlessly achieves, performs, and impresses, but who lives in chronic exhaustion trying to prove their elusive worth to parents who may have never truly seen them. These masks are unconscious, desperate attempts to ensure emotional safety in a world that once viciously punished our vulnerability. The catastrophic problem is that these rigid strategies distance us fundamentally from who we truly are. They create a yawning gap between our authentic self and the self we present to the world. And the wider this distance grows, the more intensely we feel the paralyzing emptiness. An emptiness we try to fill with compulsive consumption, frantic distraction, superficial relationships, or even hollow performative spirituality. But none of these external things can replace the core psychic truth. The inner child does not disappear with the passage of time. It waits. It waits to be recognized, heard, embraced. And while that integration does not happen, it continues to sabotage. Not out of malice, but because sabotage is the only language it knows to desperately demand our attention. Many adults spend decades trapped in this cycle, ignoring the inner child in the name of rigid maturity and harvesting as a consequence a profoundly depleted emotional life, superficial bonds, and recurring existential crises. They are convinced they need to be stronger, more productive, more rational, when, in fact, what is desperately lacking is the opposite: sensitivity, deep listening, and compassionate presence. What is missing is the capacity within themselves to care for the child that was never cared for. What is missing is an internal figure of protection and nurturing. And it is precisely this figure that Jung called the internal paternal ego, the vital psychic instance that allows the adult to consciously become, for their own self, the true good parent they never had. This is the absolute beginning of profound, lasting healing. The internal guardian, developing the self-parent. If the inner child is a living, active, and powerful force within us, how is it possible to fully coexist with it without being completely dominated by its intense wounds? Carl Jung's answer is simultaneously profound and surprisingly practical. It is not about repressing the child. It is about developing, within the same psyche, an adult who possesses the wisdom and capacity to care for it. Jung termed this the internal paternal ego, or self-parent, a psychic instance that functions as internal parents, capable of embracing, protecting, and consistently offering what the wounded child tragically never received from the external world. Contrary to the common misconception, emotional maturity is not the abandonment of the inner child, but the conscious, continuous creation of a relationship with it. And this relationship requires something few people have truly developed: conscious self-welcoming. The internal guardian is the ability to become a neutral, present observer of oneself, noticing when the wounded child is in control. Instead of reacting impulsively or violently repressing the feeling, establishing an internal, compassionate dialogue. It is the quiet, firm internal stance that states, "I see your pain. I recognize your fear. I am here now. I will not abandon you." This simple, powerful psychic stance has a revolutionary, instantaneous impact. Imagine a simple, everyday trigger. Someone rejects or criticizes you professionally. You feel a massive, disproportionate reaction: sudden, intense anger, deep, paralyzing sadness, or a primal urge to completely withdraw and isolate. Instead of simply reacting from the wounded place, the internal guardian immediately comes into action. It recognizes that it is not the robust, grounded adult who is suffering, but the wounded child reliving an old core pain of abandonment or invalidation. By initiating this internal dialogue, you fundamentally change the entire psychic dynamic. You instantly shift from a reactive, automatic mode to an active, conscious state of self-care. This process is the undeniable core of genuine psychological maturity. It is not about becoming cold, distant, or indifferent to emotions, as many falsely believe constitutes adulthood. It is precisely the opposite. It is about developing a type of internal presence that knows how to contain the pain without aggressively identifying with it. It is to be simultaneously the child who powerfully feels and the grounded adult who compassionately cares. This vital integration transforms the fragmented, chaotic psyche into a functional, whole psyche. But this does not happen solely through intellectual awareness. The internal guardian must be actively cultivated. It demands practice, intention, and above all, an uncompromising commitment to emotional truth. Many attempt to heal childhood pain only through reading, distant meditation, or conventional therapy. All of these external supports are helpful, but they cannot replace the core, internal work of learning to care for oneself as a truly good parent would care for a sensitive, vulnerable child. And it is at this critical juncture that we enter the territory of reparenting, the conscious, intentional process of offering the inner child precisely what was never given to it. Reparenting the smallest self, the act of self-creation. Most people blindly believe that time heals all childhood wounds, that simply growing up, becoming physically independent, and achieving emotional autonomy are sufficient to overcome the past. But the psychological truth is more brutal. Time heals. Absolutely nothing that continues to be aggressively ignored. The wounds of the inner child remain open, not just in the hazy realm of memory, but in the physical body, in repetitive relationship patterns, in automatic emotional reactions, and in the toxic scripts that repeat from generation to generation. And this is why Jung proposed a radical, profoundly transformative path: self-reparenting. To reparent oneself means to consciously, intentionally become the adult you fundamentally needed when you were a vulnerable child. It is not about reliving traumas indefinitely or getting lost in eternal lamentations. It is about actively building, in the present moment, a real, dependable relationship with the most sensitive and wounded part of your psyche, and doing for it what your original caregivers, due to their own limitations, trauma, or ignorance, could not do. This vital process includes offering absolute emotional validation, consistent internal safety, clear, loving boundaries, above all, the deep, non-negotiable permission to exist exactly as you are. This profound process begins with listening, not the intellectual listening that attempts to dissect pain with cold logic, but the deep emotional listening that embraces what arises without trying to instantly correct it. The inner child does not want to be fixed. It wants to be recognized. It needs to know that its pain is legitimate, that its fear is not madness, and that its need for love was not excessive. The self-reparented adult is not the one who has become emotionally invulnerable, but the one who knows how to handle their own vulnerability without the ultimate act of self-betrayal. Reparenting also demands the establishment of internal boundaries. Often, the wounded child frantically seeks in others what the conscious adult has not yet learned to offer itself. It seeks protection in dysfunctional relationships, validation in fleeting social media approval, and love in bonds where it must diminish itself to be accepted. Learning to firmly say no to these old compulsive impulses is not rejecting the child. It is protecting it. It is the internal promise. You no longer need to beg for scraps of love. I am here now. I take care of you. Another fundamental aspect of reparenting is the practice of emotional self-regulation. This means developing the acute ability to calm oneself down, to offer immediate presence in moments of crisis, and to comfort oneself without resorting to compulsion, addiction, or escape. These are simple yet monumentally powerful acts: stopping to breathe deeply when intense anxiety flares, writing to oneself as if consoling a real child, or choosing to deliberately distance oneself from toxic environments, even if the act is painful. Each of these conscious actions sends a silent but absolutely decisive message to the unconscious. I will not abandon you anymore. Over time, this consistent, relentless process fundamentally changes something very deep within the psychic structure. The wounded child ceases its incessant screaming because it is finally being heard. Impulsive, automatic reactions decrease because a present adult is now firmly in command. Relationships transform because the internal emptiness no longer demands to be filled at any cost. The energy that was once entirely trapped in defenses and painful repetitions begins to circulate freely. And with that liberation, creativity, genuine sensitivity, and a profound desire to live authentically return. This is the essence of true Jungian healing. Not erasing the past, but creating a present where old pain finds acceptance and integration. Self-reparenting is, at its core, a revolutionary, profound act. It is stating that the story does not end where it was violently interrupted, that there is a new, vast possibility, not to rewrite what happened, but to radically change the way that past lives within you today. The final transformation. From burden to guide. Something profound and transformative happens when, after years or decades of exile, the inner child is finally heard and truly accepted. The intense, crippling pain that once manifested as chronic anxiety, emotional addictions, destructive relationships, and an insatiable void begins to slowly, systematically dissolve. And what powerfully emerges from this deep process is not just relief, it is a primal power, not an aggressive or performative power, but a quiet, immense strength that arises from reconnecting with the essential parts of yourself that were once exiled. When this child is no longer treated as a problem to be solved, but is recognized as an essential sacred aspect of your being, it stops acting in the shadows. It no longer needs to sabotage your life to desperately get your attention. It does not need to scream inside you every time someone rejects, criticizes, or ignores you, because now it absolutely knows it is no longer alone. There is an adult there, a consistently present, protective, emotionally available adult. An adult who has learned how to love, not because it was taught, but because it made the radical choice not to repeat the original abandonment. And at this critical turning point, something almost magical occurs. Pain yields to creativity. Lack gives way to genuine connection. Chronic anxiety transforms into grounded, powerful presence. When the inner child feels safe, it reveals its highest face, the divine child. The one who is unafraid to feel, to create, to explore, and to be absolutely enchanted by life. The one who carries within it the deepest, most sacred meaning of existence. Jung stated that the child is the powerful symbol of wholeness. And when it is finally integrated, the human being ceases to live fragmented, divided between the persona and the shadow, between what is shown to the world and what silently suffers in private. True, unshakable freedom begins when you no longer need to violently fight against yourself, when you no longer need to wear protective masks to deserve love, when you stop shrinking your truth to be accepted. True freedom is when you become the very home you have always sought in others. This is the turning point, and it does not arrive from the outside world. It does not come from courses, external relationships, or empty, seductive promises. It comes from the radical, brave gesture of looking inward with fierce courage and saying, with absolute conviction, "I see you. I am here for you. I will not abandon you anymore." This is the non-negotiable beginning of a new life. A life that is more whole, more true, more light. A life in which you no longer need to merely survive. You can finally live. Now that you have come this far, I want to know. What was the moment in your life when you felt your inner child desperately needed someone the most? Share your answer in the comments below. Your story can profoundly touch and inspire others who are also deeply engaged in this essential process. And if this video spoke to the truth inside you, do not keep it to yourself. Like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this urgent truth. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel, because this is just the beginning of your journey. In the next video, we will continue to deepen this inner work. And you need to watch, because it will be just as fundamentally important as this one. Your transformation does not stop here. See you there.